Yeah. So look, I think the way to think of, I mean, the basic outlines are in public, right? Which is it's a time limited, basically commission. It's not a formal government agency. It's a, time limited 18-month. It'll in terms of implementation, it will advise the executive branch, right? And so the implementation will happen through the White House. And the president has total latitude on what he wants to implement. And then basically what I think about it is three kind of streams, kind of target sets, and they're related but different. So money, people, and regulations. And so, the headline number, they, put the $2 trillion number, and there's already, disputes over that and whatever. And there's a whole question there, but then there's the people thing. And the people thing is interesting because you get into these very kind of fascinating questions. And I've been doing this. I won't do this for you as a pop quiz, but I do this for people in government as a pop quiz, and I can stump them every time, which is, how many federal agencies are there? And the answer is somewhere between 450 and 520, and nobody's quite sure. And then the other is how many people work for the federal government? And the answer is, something on the order, I forget, but like 4 million full-time employees and maybe up to 20 million contractors, and nobody is quite sure. And so there's a large people component to this. And then, by the way, there's a related component to that, which is how many of them are actually in the office? And the answer is not many. Most of the federal buildings are still empty, right? And then there's questions of like, are people, working from home, or are we actually working from home? So there's the people dimension. And of course, the money and the people are connected. And then there's the third, which is the regulation thing, right? And I described earlier how basically our system of government is much more now based on regulations than legislation, right? Most of the rules that we all live under are not from a bill that went through Congress. They're from an agency that created a regulation. That turns out to be very, very important. So one is, Elon have already described, we want to do, the DOGE wants to do broad-based regulatory relief, and Trump has talked about this, and basically get the government off of people's backs and liberate the American people to be able to do things again. So that's part of it. But there's also something else that's happened, which is very interesting, which was there were a set of Supreme Court decisions about 2 years ago that went directly after the idea that the executive branch can create regulatory agencies and issue regulations and enforce those regulations without corresponding congressional legislation. And most of the federal government that exists today, including most of the departments and most of the rules and most of the money and most of the people, most of it is not enforcing laws that Congress passed. Most of it is regulation. And the Supreme Court basically said large parts, large to maybe all of that regulation that did not directly result from a bill that went through Congress the way that the cartoon said that it should, that may not actually be legal. Now, the previous White House, of course, was super in favor of big government. They had no desire to act. They did nothing based on this. They didn't, pull anything back in. But the new regime, if they choose to, could say, look, the thing that we're doing here is not, challenging the laws. We're actually complying with the Supreme Court decision that basically says we have to unwind a lot of this, and we have to unwind the regulations, which are no longer legal, constitutional. We have to unwind the spend, and we have to unwind the people. And that's how you get from basically you connect the thread from the regulation part back to the money part, back to the people part. They have work going on all three of these threads. They have, I would say, incredibly creative ideas on how to deal with this. I know lots of former government people who 100% of them are super cynical on this topic, and they're like, this is impossible. This can never possibly work. And I'm like, well, I can't tell you what the secret plans are, but like blow my mind. And all three of those, they have ideas that are like really quite amazing, as you'd expect from the people involved. And so over the course of the next few months, that'll start to become visible. And then the final thing I would say is this is going to be very different than attempts like that. There have been other programs like this in the past. The Clinton-Gore administration had one, and then there were others before that. Reagan had one. The difference is this time there's social media. And so there has never been, it's interesting. One of the reasons people in Washington are so cynical is because they know all the bullshit. Like they know all the bad spending and all the bad rules and all the look, we're adding $1 trillion to the national debt every 100 days right now. And that's compounding, and it's now passing the size of the Defense Department budget. And it's compounding, and it's pretty soon it's going to be adding $1 trillion every 90 days, and then it's going to be adding $1 trillion every 80 days, and then it's going to be $1 trillion every 70 days. And then if this doesn't get fixed at some point, we enter a hyperinflationary spiral and we become Argentina or Brazil and kablooey, right? And so everybody in DC knows that something has to be done. And then everybody in DC knows for a fact that it's impossible to do anything. Right. They know all the problems, and they also know the sheer impossibility of fixing it. But I think what they're not taking into account, what the critics are not taking into account, is these guys can do this in the full light of day, and they can do it on social media. They can completely bypass the press. They can completely bypass the cynicism. They can expose any element of, unconstitutional or, silly government spending. They can run victory laps every single day on what they're doing. They can bring the people into the process. And again, if you think about it, this goes back to our Machiavellian structure, which is, if you think about, again, you've got democracy, oligarchy, monarchy, rule of the many, rule of the few, rule of the one. You could think about what's happening here as a little bit of a sandwich, right? Which is we don't have a monarch, but we have a president, rule of the one with some power. And then we have the people who can't organize, but they can be informed and they can be aware and they can express themselves through voting and polling, right? And so there's a sandwich happening right now, is the way to think about it, which is you've got basically monarchy. You've got rule of one combining with rule of many, right? And rule of many is they do get to vote, right? The people do get to vote, basically. And then essentially Congress and the sort of permanent bureaucratic class in Washington as the oligarchy in the middle. And so the White House plus the people, I think, have the power to do all kinds of things here. And I think that would be the way I would watch it.
The transparency. I mean, Elon just by who he is incentivized to be transparent and show the bullshit in the system and to celebrate the victories. Yep. So it's going to be so exciting. I mean, honestly, it just makes government more exciting, which is a win for everybody.
These people are spending our money.
Yeah.
These people have enormous contempt for the taxpayer. Okay, here's the thing you hear in Washington. Here's one of the things. So the first thing you hear is this is impossible. They'll be able to do nothing. And then, I walk them through this and it starts to dawn on them that this is a new kind of thing. And then they're like, well, it doesn't matter because all the money is in entitlements and the debt and the military. And so you've got this silly fake, whatever, NPR funding or whatever. And it's a rounding error and it doesn't matter. And you look it up in the budget and it's whatever, $500 million or $5 billion, or it's the charging stations that don't exist. It's the $40 billion of charging stations and they build 8 charging stations, or it's the broadband internet plan that delivered broadband to nobody, right? And cost you $30 billion. So these boondoggles. And what everybody in Washington says is $30 billion is a rounding error on the federal budget. It doesn't matter. Who cares if they make it go away? And of course, any taxpayer is like, what the?
What do you mean?
It's $30 billion.
Yeah.
Right, and then the experts are like, and the press is in on this too. Then the experts are like, well, it doesn't matter because it's a rounding error. No, it's $30 billion. And if you're this cavalier about $30 billion, imagine how cavalier you are about the $3 trillion.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's $30 billion. Is $30 billion a lot of the federal budget in percentage? No, it's not. But $30 billion divided by do the math. $30 billion divided by, let's say, 300 million taxpayers. Right? What's that? Math expert?
$100.
$100 per taxpayer per year. Okay, so $100 to an ordinary person working hard every day to make money and provide for their kids. $100 is a meal out. It's a trip to the amusement park. It's the ability to, buy additional educational materials. It's the ability to have a babysitter, to be able to have a romantic relationship with your wife. There's 100 things that person can do with $100. That they're not doing because it's going to some bullshit program that is being basically where the money's being looted out in the form of just ridiculousness and graft. And so the idea that $30 billion program is not something that is a very important thing to go after is just the level of contempt for the taxpayer is just off the charts. And then that's just one of those programs. And there's 100 of those programs. And they're all just like that. It's not like any of this stuff is running well. The one thing we know is that none of this stuff is running well. We know that for sure. Right. And we know these people aren't showing up to work, and we know that all this crazy stuff is happening. Right. And do you remember Elon's story of what got the Amish to turn out to vote in Pennsylvania? Oh, okay. So Pennsylvania. Okay. So Pennsylvania is a wonderful state, great history. It has these cities like Philadelphia that have descended other cities into just complete chaos, violence, madness, and death. Right. And the federal government has just let it happen. It's incredibly violent places. And so the Biden administration decided that the big pressing law enforcement thing that they needed to do in Pennsylvania was that they needed to start raiding Amish farms to prevent them from selling raw milk with armed raids.
Right.
And it turns out it really pissed off the Amish. And it turns out they weren't willing to drive to the polling places because they don't have cars. But if you came and got them, they would go and they would vote. And that's one of the reasons why Trump won. Anyway, so the law enforcement agencies are off working on crazy things. The system's not working. And so you add up, pick $130 billion programs. All right, now you're, okay, math major, 100 times 100.
$10,000.
$10,000. Okay, $10,000 per taxpayer per year.
But it's also not just about money. That's really obviously money is a hugely important thing, but it's the cavalier attitude
Yes.
that then in the ripple effect of that, it makes it so nobody wants to work in government and be productive. It makes it so that it breeds corruption. It breeds laziness. It breeds secrecy because you don't want to be transparent about having done nothing all year, all this kind of stuff. And you want to reverse that so that it would be exciting for the future to work in government. Because the amazing thing, if you were to steel man government, is you can do shit at scale. You have money and you can directly impact people's lives in a positive sense at scale. It's super exciting. As long as there's no bureaucracy that slows you down, or not huge amounts of bureaucracy that slows you down significantly.
Yeah. So here's the term. This blew my mind because I was, once you open the hellmouth of looking into the federal budget, you learn all kinds of things. So there is a term of art in government called impoundment.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're like me, you've learned this the hard way when your car has been impounded. The government meaning of impoundment, the federal budget meaning is a different meaning. Impoundment is as follows. The Constitution requires Congress to authorize money to be spent by the executive branch, right? So the executive branch goes to Congress, says we need money X. Congress does their thing. They come back and they say you can have money Y. The money is appropriated from Congress. The executive branch spends it on the military or whatever they spend it on, or on roads to nowhere, or charging stations to nowhere, or whatever. And what's in the Constitution is the Congress appropriates the money. Over the last 60 years, there has been an additional interpretation of appropriations applied by the courts and by the system, which is the executive branch not only needs Congress to appropriate X amount of money, the executive branch is not allowed to underspend.
Yeah, I'm aware of this.
And so there's this thing that happens in Washington at the end of every fiscal year, which is September 30th, and it's the great budget flush. And any remaining money that's in the system that they don't know how to productively spend, they deliberately spend it unproductively.
Yep.
To the tune of hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars. A president that doesn't want to spend the money can't not spend it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that's not what's in the Constitution. And there's actually quite a good Wikipedia page that goes through the great debate on this that's played out in the legal world over the last 60 years. And like, basically, if you look at this with anything resembling, I think, an open mind, you're like, all right, this is not what the founders meant. And then number two, again, we go back to this thing of contempt. Like, can you imagine showing up and running the government like that and thinking that you're doing the right thing and not going home at night and thinking that you've sold your soul, right? Like, it's just like, I actually think you sort of headed in a really good point, which is it's even unfair to the people who have to execute this.
Yeah.
Right. Because it makes them bad people, and they didn't start out wanting to be bad people. And so there is stuff like this, like,
yeah, everywhere.
And so we'll see how far these guys get. I am extremely encouraged what I've seen so far.